think of production and costs?
I thought it was pretty easy, or easier than other sections, but I think you'd mentioned that it would be easier for accountants. So,
well, yes. Maeve, what do you think? Thumbs up or thumbs down?
It was okay. I think I'm still doing the overthinking thing, but working on it.
Are you still in your car again?
I am. I'm always in my car.
I heard a rumor that you're actually homeless.
Oh, really? And I just live in my car.
You live in your car, yeah.
I mean, given the times that I have met with you, I've always been in my car. So.
Yep. Did anybody have any trouble with the production and cost stuff? Okay, good. I'm glad to hear it. Okay, one thing that I don't remember if it's in the modules or not. Do you guys know the marginal average rule? Marginal average rule. Okay, the marginal average rule is a really good trick for knowing how to draw the various cost curves. So like in my face-to-face class today, we went over average and marginal costs last class. And I said, you got to learn this stuff. And so today, the first thing I did was gave them a pop quiz and said, draw the graphs of marginal and average cost, marginal and average product rather. So see, there's a certain advantage to taking the online version of the class is you don't really get pop quizzes that way. And, you know, my point is, this is something that's worth learning how to do because you're going to be using it over and over and over again. So just to reinforce that point, I gave them the pop quiz. And they were overjoyed to have that opportunity to demonstrate their learning to me. And if you believe that, you'll sign up for another one of my classes. Okay, Tiffany's always smiling. No matter what I say, you know, you got to like that. Tiffany?
Yes.
Are you always smiling in real life?
I guess.
Okay. All right. All right. The marginal average rule is very simple. I'll read it. I'll speak it. Just listen the first time, and then I'll say it again. You can write it down if you want to. Okay. If the average is falling, the marginal is below it. The marginal is less than the average. If the average is rising, the marginal must be above it. So marginal is greater than average. If the average is neither rising nor falling, then the marginal is what?
Constant.
It's equal to the average. That's where the marginal curve always intersects, is at the minimum or maximum point of the average curve. Okay, we know that an average cost curve, any average cost curve except for average fixed cost, looks like a smiley face, and an average product curve looks like a frowny face. And we know that, what does marginal cost look like, Morgan? Any idea? This is right up your alley. Morgan or anybody? What's marginal cost look like? It's a negative sign. It's a swoosh.
Swoosh, yeah.
Yeah, okay, and marginal product is an upside down swoosh. Okay, so do you want me to repeat the marginal average rule? It's easy. When the average is falling, the marginal is below it. When the average is rising, the marginal is above it. Okay, it works for any set of marginal and average curves, except for average fixed cost, because that's kind of an exception to the rule. It's really, the rule comes from the math involved. You don't need to know the math. Let me explain it to you really, really simply. You take an exam, it pulls your average down. Okay, let's say that's the case. If it pulls your average down, how did you do on the exam relative to your average?
Worse.
You did worse, right? Okay, so the exam is the marginal grade, right? So if you take an exam and it raises your average, that's because the exam was greater than your average, and so it's helping to pull it up. All right. Learn the rule, and you'll be very happy on the next exam and the final, because you're going to need to be able to, if not draw curves, then at least identify which curves are which, and that's kind of important. Okay. Let's see. I'm just kind of going through my head what we needed to cover. Okay, so this week we are definitely on the downside of the semester, meaning if you can't see the end, at least you know it's coming, regardless of what you do. The next two modules are very intense and detail-oriented. The one module is on perfect competition, which is essentially the model that we compare all the other market structures to. Okay, let me just give you a little context here. Firms have to make a number of important decisions, like how much output to produce, what price to charge, how many workers to hire, how much capital to use, how much advertising to do. You know, there's dozens of decisions. The way they answer the way they make those decisions starts with their objective, their operating objective. So we assume that the firm is trying to maximize profits. If they had some other objectives like maximizing market share, then the answers to those questions would be different. Okay, but we're going to stick with profit maximization. So that's the first thing that has a bearing on their decisions. The second thing that has a bearing on their decisions is the cost structure that the firm has. Okay, there can be high cost firms, there can be low cost firms, and what their cost structure is helps them, or at least limits their ability to choose any answers to those questions. It's something that they have to take into account. And then the third thing that has a bearing on those questions is market structure, the structure of the market that the firm operates in. Market structure has to do with how competitive conditions are in the industry. All right. So there are 4 models of market structure. I'm sure you know what they are at this point. There's perfect competition on one side. There's monopoly on the other side, which is kind of the other extreme case. There's oligopoly and there's monopolistic competition. Okay, these are models in the real world. It may be that that a given industry doesn't fit one of those models exactly right, but it's going to be somewhere in the range there. Okay, so perfect competition is a funny example. It's funny because it's hard to come up with a lot of examples of perfect competition in the real world. But perfect competition is sort of the benchmark that we compare other market structures to. Okay. For example, perfectly competitive firms are allocatively efficient and productively efficient. Okay. Other market structures aren't necessarily those things. So what we will do is we would take another market structure, say monopolistic competition, and compare it to perfect competition to draw some inferences about how efficient it is. And in the real world, we would take a specific industry and do the same thing. So even though we can say that perfect competition doesn't exist, and I will say that's just a little bit of an overstatement, it is the thing that we compare actual industries to. Okay, and so it's worth spending the time to learn perfect competition. Okay, so we are going to learn all the ins and outs of perfect competition, how costs affect perfectly competitive firms, and all kinds of other things that we are then going to repeat 3 more times in the next module when we look at what I call market structure in the real world, which is monopolies and oligopolies and monopolistically competitive firms. So we're going to do the same thing 4 times. Hopefully, by the end of the 4th time, you'll get it. All right. And I know Maeve is definitely looking forward to that. Actually, knowing Maeve, she'll probably get it by the 3rd time or maybe the 2nd time. And so by the end, she'll be sick of it. But that's okay, because that means she'll do well on the exam. All right. Okay, now, the way things work in these modules is we start from a situation of equilibrium. Okay, remember, we now know 2 different kinds of equilibriums. We know market equilibrium, where supply equals demand. We know consumer equilibrium, where the consumer has chosen the level or the combinations of goods and services that maximize its utility given the budget that it has. Now we're going to learn about producer equilibrium. Okay, so we start from a situation of equilibrium, and then something happens to disturb the equilibrium. What you need to be able to do is figure out what happens to get the firm and the industry back to equilibrium again. Okay, so I'm just giving you a heads up. That's what we're going to aim for, is being able to do those kinds of questions. Okay, so the best way to actually learn that is, of course, by doing examples of it. Okay, so tomorrow I'm going to push out another group assignment so that you have people to work with. And since you guys are here and you deserve a little reward, I will show you approximately what the assignment is going to look like. Let me share my screen. Actually, let me pull the assignment up first. All right. Scrolling down. Here we go. Found it. All right. Now let me share my screen. Share. Okay. This is actually one of those optional assignments that's in the modules. And this assignment I wrote, and that's I'm going to modify it a little bit, but this is basically what you're going to have to do. Suppose you run an independent trucking business, blah, blah, blah. And then it says independent trucking is an industry that can be considered perfectly competitive. Draw a graph showing market supply, market demand, market equilibrium price and quantity. Draw a corresponding graph for the individual firm using the market equilibrium price and marginal cost curves. Now, suppose the economy gets better, okay? How does an improvement in the economy then affect the independent trucking industry? How does it affect it in the short run? How does it affect it in the long run? Draw the graphs, explain everything that's going on. Okay, so there's a lot of parts here. But if you can do this, you can do anything having to do with market structure. All right, anybody have any questions about this? I know it's a lot to throw at you in a hurry, but at least you have a sense of what's coming down the pike really soon now. All right. I can tell you're all excited. Let's go back to here. All right. So that's really all I wanted to say tonight. Do you guys have any general questions or questions about the assignment or questions about the exam or anything like that?
When's the due date on that assignment, Dr. Gino?
What's that?
When's the due date on that assignment?
Uh,
The group assignment?
When would you like it to be? I was thinking at least a week.
Sounds fair.
And the complication is that we're going to be, next week we're going to have another set of modules to read, right? So I think you can do it in a week, especially if you've already taken a look at the module so that you can jump right into it. Or I guess I should say one of you has taken a look at the module so that you can direct the others. Other questions?
Clarify the midterms next Friday, right?
That is the date, yes.
Okay.
And it will be the same format as the last one.
Okay.
Other questions? Morgan's awfully quiet tonight. All right, in that case, I guess we'll call it a night and I will go cook dinner. Thank you, everybody.